History is full of bad roommates. You know the type. They eat your leftovers, leave wet towels on the floor, and steal your islands when you aren't looking. For Carthage in the 3rd century BC, that roommate was the Roman Republic. After getting thoroughly thrashed in the First Punic War, Carthage was broke, humiliated, and really needed a vacation. Or, more accurately, they needed money. So, the Barcid family, led by the perpetually angry Hamilcar Barca, packed their bags and went to Spain. Why Spain? Because it was full of silver, angry tribes to conquer, and exactly 0 Romans. It was the perfect place to rebuild an empire and plot a sequel that would make the original look like a low-budget indie film. Rome, watching from across the water, started getting nervous. They liked Carthage poor and sad, not rich and militarized. So, in 226 BC, a Roman delegation waddled over to Hasdrubal the Fair, who was running the show after Hamilcar drowned, long story, and demanded a treaty. They drew a line at the river Ebro. The deal was simple. Carthage stays south of the Ebro, Rome stays north. Everyone is happy, world peace achieved. Except, Rome has never been great at following its own rules. Enter Saguntum. Saguntum was a Greekish trading city. It was wealthy, strategic, and crucially located way south of the Ebro. Technically, it was in Carthage's backyard, but the Saguntines, seeing the Carthaginians conquering everything in sight, decided to slide into Rome's DMs. Rome accepted the alliance. They claimed Saguntum was a friend of the Roman people. This was roughly the geopolitical equivalent of your neighbor parking his car in your driveway and threatening to sue you if you touch it. It was a blatant provocation, a total jerk move, and exactly the kind of excuse a young 20-something general named Hannibal Barca was waiting for. The year is 221 BC. Hasdrubal the Fair, having done a decent job of empire building, gets himself assassinated by a Celtic slave with a personal grudge. It was tragic, messy, and left a vacancy for supreme commander of Carthaginian forces in Spain. Hannibal Barca was 26 years old. He was charismatic, brilliant, and hated Rome with the burning intensity of 1,000 suns. Remember that oath his dad made him swear when he was 9? The never be a friend to Rome one? Yeah, he took that very literally. He didn't want to just manage Spain, he wanted to burn Rome to the ground. But he needed a reason. He couldn't just attack Rome directly, or the politicians back in Carthage, who were mostly old, rich dudes terrified of losing their money, would have a stroke. Hannibal needed Rome to throw the first punch, or at least he needed to make it look like they did. Saguntum was the perfect bait. The city was getting cocky with their new Roman friendship bracelet. They started attacking local tribes allied to Carthage. Acting like the toughest kid on the playground because their big brother was a bodybuilder, Hannibal sent a polite but firm message to Rome. Hey, your friends are beating up my friends. I'm going to have to intervene. Rome, suffering from a terminal case of arrogance, essentially replied, "Don't touch them. We are Rome. We matter. You don't." This was the green light. In 219 BC, Hannibal didn't just intervene. He rolled up to Saguntum with 150,000 men. This wasn't a diplomatic mission. This was a siege. He surrounded the city, set up camp, and prepared to squeeze. The Saguntines panicked and sent frantic messages to Rome. "Help! He's here! Send legions!" Rome didn't send an army. They sent a committee. Because nothing stops a ruthless warlord quite like a sternly worded letter from 3 guys in togas. The Roman envoys arrived in Spain expecting Hannibal to bow down, apologize, and maybe shine their sandals. They were, after all, Romans. They had defeated Carthage before. In their minds, Hannibal was just some upstart kid playing soldier in the sandbox. They demanded a meeting. Hannibal, who was busy dodging javelins and directing siege towers, told them he was too busy to meet. He essentially ghosted the Roman Republic. He suggested that if they had a complaint, they should take it up with the Carthaginian Senate in Africa. It was a diplomatic slap in the face so hard it echoed across the Mediterranean. Furious, the Roman envoys sailed to Carthage. They marched into the Council of Elders and started making demands. They wanted Hannibal arrested. They wanted him handed over to Rome. They wanted Saguntum left alone. The Carthaginian Senate, emboldened by all that Spanish silver pouring into their treasury, decided to grow a spine for the first time in decades. They debated, they hemmed, and they hawed, pointing out that Saguntum wasn't even mentioned in the original treaty. Meanwhile, back at Saguntum, things were getting grim. The help Rome had promised was nowhere to be found. The city was on its own. Hannibal wasn't just starving them out. He was actively dismantling their walls. He used battering rams, catapults, and the sheer weight of numbers. But the Saguntines were stubborn. They knew that surrender meant slavery or death, so they fought like cornered badgers. Hannibal was in the thick of it too. At one point, he got too close to the walls and took a heavy javelin to the thigh. His army panicked. If their golden boy died, the whole campaign was toast. He survived, obviously. And now, he was limping, angry, and ready to finish this. With Hannibal back on his feet, albeit with a slight limp that just made him look tougher, the siege kicked into high gear. The initial assaults had been repelled, but Hannibal was an engineer at heart. He didn't just want to fight, he wanted to solve the problem of Saguntum's walls, and his solution was gravity. The Carthaginians built a mobile siege tower that was taller than the city fortifications. This wasn't just a ladder, it was a death machine on wheels, packed with archers, scorpions, and angry infantry. They rolled it up to the walls, raining suppressing fire down on the defenders while miners dug underneath the foundations. The mining was the real killer. Carthaginian sappers weakened the base of the wall until a massive section of the fortifications collapsed into a pile of rubble. The breach was open, but the Saguntines weren't done. While the wall was falling, they had built another wall behind it. It was like a nesting doll of defenses. When Hannibal's troops charged through the dust, expecting victory, they were met with a fresh barrier and a hail of spears. The fighting was brutal, close quarters chaos. It was a stalemate, but time was on Hannibal's side. He had the countryside, the supplies, and the patience. Inside the city, things were getting desperate. They were eating leather shields. They were melting down their jewelry. They were still checking their phones for that text from Rome. Spoiler alert, Rome left them on read. 8 months. That's how long the siege had been going on. To put that in perspective, you could have conceived a child and been nearly ready to deliver it in the time Saguntum had been waiting for Rome to show up. Rome, meanwhile, was likely very busy arguing about important matters, like whether the aqueducts should run clockwise or counterclockwise. Inside Saguntum, the situation had gone from bad to apocalyptic. The food was gone. The hope was gone. The only thing they had plenty of was despair. Seeing this, Hannibal decided to offer them a way out. He didn't go himself, he was still annoyed about the leg wound, so he sent a local Spanish chieftain named Alorcus to deliver the terms. Alorcus walked into the city, pinched his nose at the smell of unwashed bodies and burnt hope, and laid out Hannibal's offer. It was a classic high-pressure sales tactic. He told them, "Here's the deal, you surrender. You give up the city. You give up all your gold and silver. You can leave with 2 changes of clothes, no more, no less, and go live in a nice, undefended patch of dirt where Hannibal tells you to." It was a humiliating offer. It meant total loss of identity and wealth. The leaders of Saguntum looked at each other. They looked at their starving families. They looked at their accumulated wealth. And they decided to pull the ultimate scorched earth move. Instead of accepting, they built a massive bonfire in the town square. They dragged every ounce of gold, silver, fine silk, and expensive furniture they could find and threw it onto the pyre. It was the most expensive barbecue in history. They would rather burn their heritage than let a single coin fall into Hannibal's pocket. It was a noble, tragic, and incredibly stubborn gesture. It was also the signal that the end was near. While the Saguntine elite were busy roasting their retirement funds in the town square, they made a critical tactical error. They forgot to watch the front door. You see, when you pull the entire garrison off the walls to help throw heavy chests of gold into a fire, you leave what military experts call a gaping hole in your defenses. The Carthaginian army, noticing the smoke and the sudden lack of arrows flying at their faces, realized something was up. A tower collapsed, a section of wall crumbled, and Hannibal's troops poured into the city like water into a sinking ship. There was no organized resistance this time, it was a scramble. The fighting that followed was less of a battle and more of a catastrophe. Hannibal, furious that the siege had taken 8 months and cost him valuable men, and that the Saguntines were currently burning his future paycheck, ordered no quarter. The orders were simple: kill the adults, enslave the rest, and loot whatever wasn't melted slag. Some of the Saguntine leaders, realizing the gig was up, threw themselves into the fire rather than be captured. It was a grim, horrific end to a city that had bet everything on a Roman alliance that turned out to be worthless. The streets ran red, the fires burned for days. When the dust settled, Saguntum was a smoking ruin. Hannibal had his prize, though it was a bit crispier than he would have liked. He managed to salvage enough loot to send back to Carthage and to pay his mercenaries. But the message was clear: being Rome's friend was hazardous to your health. News of Saguntum's destruction finally reached Rome. It hit the Senate floor with the wet thud of a dead fish. The realization washed over the city. While they had been busy debating semantics and adjusting their togas, their loyal ally had been wiped off the map. Rome, the self-proclaimed protector of the weak, looked weak. And if there was one thing Rome hated more than Hannibal, it was looking like a loser. The Senate went into damage control mode. The war party was screaming, "I told you so." The peace party was awkwardly shuffling their papers and looking at the ceiling. The shame was palpable. They had to do something. They couldn't just let Hannibal get away with deleting a city. It was bad for the brand. But did they mobilize the legions immediately? Did they launch a lightning strike? No. They decided to send another embassy. Yes, really. Because clearly the first one worked so well. They picked a group of their oldest, grumpiest senators, led by a man named Fabius, a name you should remember, because his family basically owns this war. Their mission: go to Carthage and demand they hand over Hannibal. It was a demand they knew Carthage would refuse. You don't hand over your most successful general just because the guys you hate ask nicely. It was a formality, a way for Rome to check the box that said, "We tried diplomacy," before they started stabbing people. They arrived in Carthage, not to talk, but to deliver an ultimatum. The air was thick with tension. The Carthaginian Senate was packed. The Romans marched to the center of the room, looking like grim reapers in bed sheets. The time for talk was over. The scene inside the Carthaginian Senate was tense enough to snap a pila. On one side, the Carthaginian elders, fat on Spanish silver and feeling uncharacteristically brave. On the other, the Roman embassy, led by Fabius. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He didn't ask about their grandkids or compliment the drapes. He stood in the center of the floor, gathered the folds of his toga into a massive bunch at his chest, and looked around the room with eyes that said, "I am about to ruin your whole decade." We bring you here two choices. Fabius boomed, his voice echoing off the marble. "In this fold, I carry war and peace. Choose which one you want." It was the ancient equivalent of the red pill, blue pill moment, but with significantly more stabbing potential. The Carthaginian suffete wasn't having it. He looked Fabius dead in the eye and shouted back, "You choose! Give us whatever you like!" It was a bold move, a "call an ambulance, but not for me" moment. The Carthaginians were essentially saying, "We don't care anymore, bring it on." Fabius smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who just realized the sheep gate was unlocked. He let the folds of his toga drop dramatically. "Then I give you war," Fabius roared. The Carthaginian senators jumped to their feet, fist pumping and cheering. "We accept it," they screamed back. It was pandemonium. The Second Punic War had officially begun. No more proxies, no more sieges of third-party cities. This was the main event. Fabius turned on his heel and walked out, probably feeling very cool, unaware that he had just initiated a conflict that would nearly destroy his civilization. While the politicians were busy with their dramatic toga-dropping ceremonies, Hannibal was already moving. He had spent the winter resting his army, buying new horses, and probably working on his cardio. When the news arrived that war was declared, he didn't look worried, he looked relieved. Hannibal knew he couldn't win a naval war. Rome controlled the seas. If he tried to sail to Italy, he'd end up as shark bait like the fleets in the First Punic War. So, he came up with a plan, so audacious, so stupid, so impossibly dangerous that Rome would never see it coming. He was going to walk. He was going to march an army of infantry, cavalry, and for some reason 37 elephants from Spain through the hostile tribes of Gaul, over the freezing death trap peaks of the Alps, and straight into Rome's backyard. It was the logistical equivalent of trying to drive a tank from Lisbon to Moscow without a GPS or gas money. Rome assumed the war would be fought in Spain and Africa. They sent one consul to Sicily and another to Spain. They had no idea that the boogeyman was already knocking on the back door. They thought they had contained the fire. In reality, they had just locked themselves in the house with an arsonist. Hannibal gathered his troops. He gave a rousing speech about loot, glory, and sticking it to the Romans. The men cheered, the elephants trumpeted, the march began. The die was cast. Rome had played a game of chicken with a man who didn't understand the concept of breaks. By ignoring Saguntum, they had hoped to avoid a war, but instead, they provided the perfect excuse for one. Their arrogance blinded them to the reality that Hannibal wasn't just another Carthaginian general. He was a force of nature fueled by childhood trauma and tactical genius. The tragedy of Saguntum was merely the prologue. The city's ashes were the kindling that would start a fire consuming Italy for nearly 2 decades. Rome thought they were the hunters, dispatching legions to distant lands to manage the problem. They didn't realize that for the first time in their history, they were about to become the prey. As Hannibal's column disappeared into the northern horizon, leaving Spain behind, the stage was set for the most legendary and possible journey in military history. The Alps were waiting, the snow was waiting, and Rome was sleeping, blissfully unaware that the monster they provoked was coming to wake them up. And that, dear viewer, is how you accidentally start a world war by being a terrible ally.